Hello guys, welcome to our very first tutorials on CKB Studio. My name is Cedric, I'm from the Obsidian Labs. CKB Studio is a graphic IDE for the CKB developers who write CKB Script and make it easier for all the developers to compile and run their own script on the CKB network. This tutorial was actually created for the CKB hackathon, and we're gonna guide you through the whole processes on the CKB development with CKB Studio. And we hope you enjoy it, and let's get started. We're gonna divide this tutorial into 3 parts. Basically follow the same timeline as everyone who wants to use CKB Studio to develop their CKB script would do. The first part would be we will be preparing our environment, the local machine for the CKB Studio, and install all the necessary parts of the CKB development. The second part would be creating our own projects. We're gonna build our own projects out of the simple UDT project, which is one of the official CKB projects on the repository. And also we're gonna check all the features on the CKB Studio with our own projects, including the compiler and the debugger, which is very useful during CKB development processes. The third part would be the transaction. Transaction plays a very important role in the CKB development, and we want to look into the transaction part. We're going to build different kinds of transaction, including the regular transfer, the mint UDT, and other different types of transaction to give you a brief idea about how to write your own transaction into the CKB projects. Also, we're going to show you how to digitally sign your transaction and push it to the CKB network. This pretty much covers all the basics on CKB Studio and CKB development, and we hope you can know pretty much the basics after seeing this tutorial and started your own very first project on CKB Studio. So enjoy! So let's get started. The very first step of using CKB Studio is definitely install it. CKB Studio is an application right now supporting macOS and Linux. For those of you who are using Windows, I'm sorry it's not supported yet, but we're working very hard on supporting that in the very near future. And I'll let you know once we support Windows. And for those people who already get macOS and Linux, you can download the software in the link below. Click the link, get into their GitHub repository and download the application and install it. Run it, you will see this on your computer. So this is our welcoming screen on CKB Studio, and all these 4 parts are the prerequisite that you have to install before you actually run the CKB Studio. The CKB Node, which is our main software that runs CKB Node and CKB Miner. The CKB Indexer, which is a software indexing all the CKB transactions. And the third would be the CKB compiler, which actually compiles all the CKB script that you write. All these 3 parts needs Docker to be able to run on your computer, so you have to install Docker at the very first beginning. The other 3, CKB Node, CKB Indexer, CKB Compiler, can be installed by clicking the Install button. On the right of each line, there will be a few available versions. For each of them, we always strongly recommend you to pick the newest one. Once you click, it will show a pop-up window, and no worry, all the procedure of installation is automated, and the only thing you have to do is to wait. So now everything has been installed, and click on the Get Started button at the bottom, and we are ready to go. It will bring us to the project list screen. But before we go ahead and create our own very first project, we want to show you how to create our own CKB node first. To start our own CKB network, click the icon on the top right corner, and it will bring you to the CKB instances screen. But before we start our CKB instances, we have to create our key pair for the miner. Click the key icon on the bottom left corner and click Create. Name your key pair as miner and save. Close it, and now we can start our own new instances. Pick the miner address as our last at the key pair we just created, and name our instances, create, and click start. Now you are creating your very own first CKB instances, the CKB node. It includes the CKB node, indexer, and miner. So the top right panel also serves as the option panel to connect to testnet and the mainnet. So you can click the drop-down menu and pick whatever test you want to connect to, or just simply run your local network. Since we have started our very own first CKB nodes, we can now explore the Explorer function. Click the column and input the miner address, which is our key pair address, and the whole information associated with this miner will just pop up, including the most important, our balances, and also the account information and the transaction, the mining transaction actually. So now we can switch back to the project list screen and click new to create our new project. You can pick your favorite template, and here we are using the simple UDT template. UDT also stands for user defined token, and name our project as my UDT. Click create, and we have duplicate a simple UDT project as our own project called my UDT. So now the project has been created, and this is the source code for the template, which is basically the simple UDT projects. And first we take a look at the project settings. As you may see, this is a project written in a C programming languages. Also, the CKB now supports JavaScript and maybe Rust in the near future. The build settings just leave as it is, and debug setting, we will touch that part later in the debugger section. And now we just keep it as it is. Back to the source code. This source code is a C project, so it contains a main function. We're not going to touch the details about the all the functions and how the code is written. But if you're interested, you can refer to the references in the README file. It will give you plenty of the details if you're interested. So now we'll just go ahead and compile this project. And after the compilation, it will just create a simple udt.o file, which is the binary for the project. And this is also the binary file we want to deploy to the CKB network. And to help you go through your code much more easier, we integrate a CKB debugger into the CKB Studio as well. That piece of software will enable you to run your CKB script without the CKB network. And to run the CKB debugger, click on the debug button, and now it says success. Of course it's success, it's an official project. And of course, the CKB debugger has a lot of very advanced features. You may insert any debug messages into your code to learn more about how your code is running, like this. Yeah, it will just put all the debug messages in the output of the debugger running, so that you will learn more about how your code is actually running in the main function. So by default, the CKB debugger uses this predefined mock transaction file to run all the CKB script. But in case you want to use your own mock transaction file, you can go to the project setting, point the mock file column to your own customized mock file, and then run the CKB debugger again, so that it will just go through the mock transaction file you just defined for your script. If you want to know more about how the mock transaction file is written, you can refer to the CKB debugger documentation on the website. So now we are taking a look at the most important and probably most complicated part of the CKB Studio, the transaction constructor. Click the transaction constructor button, and you will see the screen of the CKB transaction constructor. It will divide it into two parts. The upper parts would be the inputs, outputs, depends are all the necessary parts of the transaction in the CKB. The below parts would be the cell explorer. To view the cell explorer, you have to put any address into the column, and it will show the live cells associated with this address. If you are not familiar with the CKB transaction, including the inputs, outputs, depends, or the cells, you have to refer to the CKB documentation. You must make sure that you are fully understand all of these concepts before we proceed. So this is the miner address we created earlier in our CKB node earlier in this tutorial, and we turn on the show empty cells option. Double click on one of the cells. So this is the details of this particular cells. It contains a few pieces of data or information. First one is capacity, which means how many CKB tokens this particular cells has, and also in CKB languages, it also means how many bytes of data it could store in this particular cells. The out points, there is a few parts of information in the out points, but the most important one is actually the hash of the transaction that creates this particular cells. The log script contains the information, or basically the addresses that has this particular cells. In our cells, the TypeScript and data are empty. There is nothing in both of the columns, which we define in CKB languages a empty cell. So that's why all the cells are empty. And the other reason, or the basic that you have to know, is that all the cells that miner has mined are actually empty cells at the very beginning. So you have to click on the show empty cells to show them once it's mined. So the next step, we want to make a transfer between our CKB accounts. To start with, we need to create another receiver key pair in the key management console. We name it as receiver. And we make a transfer by click the transfer button. Besides the addresses, we want to transfer 5,000 CKB tokens to the receiver we just created, and the CKB Studio will automatically create or construct the transaction for us, 5,000 tokens to the receiver accounts by picking 3 inputs depending on the live cells that the miner has. So here it picks 3 of the cells as input, and output, the first output is 5,000 tokens that we requested to be transferred into the receiver account. The remaining is actually the difference between the inputs and outputs, the total capacity difference between the inputs and outputs. So our transaction is ready, and now we click on the push transaction button. This is the raw JSON object of the transaction we just created, but it's not yet ready to publish because it still lacks the digital signature that authorized the whole transaction, and you can see in the raw object the witnesses part is still empty. To sign the transaction, you click on the addresses you want to use to sign this transaction and click sign transaction. And now you can see the witness section has been fulfilled. You may go ahead and push the transaction, and now your transaction has been successfully pushed to the CKB network. Okay, so let's get back to the Explorer to see if the transaction has been done. Copy the receiver address onto the column, and you will see in the transaction column, the transaction has been successfully executed and the balance has been updated. So in some cases, you didn't see the transaction being showed up. Wait for 5 to 10 seconds because the transaction needs some time to fully process by the CKB network, and refresh. You will be able to see the transaction updated, and all the balance has been updated as well. Let's get back to the transaction constructor. There is actually a common case where transaction may fail. Let's say we want to transfer 6,000 CKB tokens into the receiver accounts, and we sign and push, and you will see an error message saying insufficient cell capacity. This was actually due to the nature of the CKB token or the CKB cells. The CKB cells, even if it's empty, it still requires some bytes of data to be stored in the CKB cell. This is due to the nature of the CKB cells. As I mentioned before, the capacity of CKB cells also means the number of bytes of data it could store in the cells. But for CKB cells, even if it's empty, it still requires some space to store its basic data like log script, capacity, and out points. The minimum required bytes of data is 61. So essentially, any CKB cells has to be equal or greater than 61 CKB tokens to be able to exist in the system. So now we want to make some more advanced transactions on the CKB network. It's UDT related transactions. To do that, we first need to deploy our UDT script to the CKB network. Click the new cells, and in the data section, click on files. Pick the simple _udt.o binary file we just compiled, and look here. The simple UDT source code actually is about 29 kilobytes files, which would consume the same part of the space in the cells. So that brings up the total capacity of the cells to about 29K. And preview. And now the CKB Studio has constructed a transaction to fulfill our request about building a cell of 29.8K capacity to host our UDT project source code. And now we sign and push so that we can publish this onto our CKB network. So wait for 5 to 10 seconds for the process to be completed, and then you will figure out there is a new type of cells called simple UDT in the Live Cell Explorer, and the icons is a little bit different because this time in the data column it actually contains the source code or the binary, actually the binary we have just compiled from our simple UDT projects. And we click add cell to the references so that it will add this type of cells into the reference table of CKB Studio. It will make us much more easier when we build the same type of projects and reuse the same type of cells. So next step, we want to try mint the UDT, the user-defined token, and create our own token. Double click the mint button, and here you can define your own symbol for the token. We call it my token. The symbol is empty, name is my token. If you happen to have an icon for a newly defined token, you can just point it to the file online or offline here, but we just skip it. In the amount column, type in the number you want to initially issue to the receiver and pick the receiver address here in the receiver column. Then preview. The CKB Studio will just construct the transaction for you to fulfill your request on the mint UDT transaction. So in this transaction, it's a little bit different from the previous one because in the depends section, now it shows the cell. It's actually the simple UDT cell we just created before. Here it can be showed in the column because we added to the reference table in the previous steps. You have to do that, otherwise the CKB Studio won't be able to find it for your projects. In the output, in this transaction, the data and the TypeScript are no longer empty. It's fulfilled with the data we just created in the mint UDT steps. the number of UDT tokens to be 1,000. In the TypeScript, we take a further look at the TypeScript. It's actually a code hash. It contains a code hash that points to the simple UDT cells it depends on. So if you want to learn more about the TypeScript information, you can refer to the CKB transaction or the simple UDT documentations. Now we're ready to sign and push this transaction to the CKB network. So let's wait for another 5 to 10 seconds and jump to the Explorer page. Put into the receiver addresses, and you will be able to see the mint UDT transaction has been fulfilled in the transaction column. And let's go back to the transaction constructor. You will be able to see a new type of icon for our newly defined user-defined token, the my token. This was basically based on the simple UDT script we just deployed to the CKB network. So in the last part of our tutorial, we're gonna try to transfer our user-defined token back to the miner. Click again on the transfer icons. Now we pick the UDT, our my token, as the token to be transferred. And we're gonna transfer 500 tokens back to the miner. Preview, and you will see the CKB Studio has automatically constructed the transaction for us. And we just go ahead and sign and push to the CKB network. And you will see the transaction has been pushed, and it will take effective in 5 to 10 seconds. So all of the transactions we have showed in this tutorial are created automatically by the CKB Studio. But once you are familiar with the CKB transaction, or you are confident to build your own CKB transaction, you can always make arbitrary transaction by drag and drop different cells into the inputs or depends, or even manually edit any properties in output cells. So in that sense, the CKB transaction constructor is a really powerful tool for CKB developers to build arbitrary kind of CKB transactions. So this is pretty much it. We only are able to cover very basics of the CKB and the CKB Studio in these short tutorials, but if you want to learn more about CKB, you can refer to the CKB official documentations or the CKB Studio on their GitHub page. So more information are shown below. So thank you very much for your time watching this tutorial today, and also would like to thank you for your interest in CKB Studio. If you want to know more about CKB Studio and want to connect to your fellow developers, you can always join our Telegram group. Or if you're in China, you can join our WeChat group. So thank you and have a nice day.